Do I have ADHD or am I just lazy? Why do I find it so tiring to go about my everyday life, which everyone else is able to go about it quite easily and still have the energy to do tasks afterwards? Hi, I'm Mallika Shah, a clinical psychologist with Amaha, and today I'm here to answer your most frequently asked questions about ADHD.
How can I excel at complex projects but still forget the simplest daily tasks like paying my bill?
That's a great question. Most often, when someone with ADHD does come in for therapy and are struggling with everyday tasks, they're most often talking about tasks that are monotonous, that tend to be an everyday necessity for them to perform. Now, this can happen for many reasons. One of them is that when we are focused on something that's a bigger, challenging task, a part of it is that there's firstly the factor of it being challenging in itself, which can act as a bigger motivation to want to keep continuing it. When some portion of that challenge gets completed, it gives a larger amount of gratification towards the idea that I was able to complete this, which keeps you want to be motivated in the task. A larger task includes novelty, uniqueness, something that you may be exploring for yourself for the first time as well. This adds so much more interest to the task that you're trying to perform in a much more complicated task within itself. That's why often such tasks are easier to persist through. But everyday tasks like needing to pay the bills or remembering to do certain tasks that you take up every day like laundry, doing the dishes, they are monotonous. Specifically for someone with ADHD, trying to direct your focus on tasks that involve monotony or are boring in some form can feel like it's a necessity that they don't find the interest to go ahead and take the first step towards.
Why do I swing between bursts of intense focus and long stretches of paralysis?
Very often when we hear the term ADHD, which comes down to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the word itself says attention deficit. And what it gets understood as is that there's a deficiency of attention in itself, which makes the idea of being hyper-focused so confusing. ADHD, more than just a direct deficit of attention, is rather more like a dysregulation of attention. Most often, when there's a task that I realize I should be attending towards or I should be focusing on, feels much more tougher sometimes to just direct your focus towards them. We function with two major kinds of attention when we're trying to be present in our everyday life. An automatic attending tendency and one that's much more intentional or directed by ourselves. The tendency to be able to direct focus is where the deficit lies. Hyperfocus is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can make us miss out on things that we do on a daily basis. Trying to have visual cues or external cues that can help us gently move out of a trance of hyperfocus. For example, setting a reminder on your phone so that when it rings, you're reminded to go back to everyday tasks that you need to, may be a helpful thing to try.
How do I explain the grief of realizing ADHD has shaped so much of my childhood and my relationships now that I know I'm diagnosed with ADHD?
This is something that we face, or I hear so often from so many of my clients, that coming to a realization or getting to the diagnosis simply of having ADHD comes with such mixed emotions. Yes, there's sometimes some sense of relief to get an answer to why some things were happening. But it's also met with a deep sense of grief about a sense of loss of so many aspects of their own life that they don't now know how they can categorize or process them with this newfound information. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So it's very, very necessary that the same deficits that we're talking about today, mostly seen in adults as well, have been persistent while the child was growing up. Multiple labels like lazy, very, very procrastinating, so naughty in the way that someone's always in the visual of being the one child who does everything that's wrong. Such aspects keep coming up as labels attached to people who now recognize that they have ADHD. But these labels were not necessarily something that you could have controlled. What you may be outside of these labels feels such a foreign concept to suddenly come to. This can create that sense of grief that becomes quite a part of ADHD, and working in therapy towards a much more easier life with ADHD.
Why do I feel guilty seeking help for ADHD when I can function on the outside?
As I hear this, I'm reminded sometimes of how when I'm trying to, let's say, walk and I happen to sprain my leg, that leads to some pain. I'm not able to walk as I was previously, and so I may not immediately seek some help for it. But as I keep doing the same, it does get extremely painful over and over consistently, mainly because I haven't yet addressed the sprain that I had on my leg. Just because you have ADHD doesn't necessarily mean that you can't function. That's true. However, this doesn't account for the fact that while someone may be getting up, doing their usual morning routine of freshening up, having a bath, going to work, someone with ADHD is going through many more tasks within these smaller tasks of trying to get up and go to work. There's a bunch of various techniques that may be needed for this person to wake up, build the motivation to go ahead and decide how they want to go ahead and work, make a list of what all things they need to do, simply because they realize if without a list they may not find it as easy to go about their working day. All of these are draining aspects of being someone who has or is functioning with ADHD. The toll that it can take is much more than what we might understand for someone who is a neurotypical going about their usual day in the world. When someone with neurodivergency is trying to function like a neurotypical, it's extremely exhausting. That is why the sense of guilt, while extremely understandable, is something that is helpful to address in therapy and work through, because you do deserve the help that you want and you need. It's an absolutely valid concern, and you are trying to work on something that you don't have the exact control over while not knowing what it brings with itself.